Hello and welcome to the Essex Boys murder case, part 37. Before watching this video, I recommend watching part 4 onwards on YouTube first, as these videos are all about the key individuals and the murder victims' movements on the day of the 6th of December 1995. A quick mention to the Facebook page called The Real Essex Boys Murder Club. If you're interested, please feel free to join, as there's some great people on there with a lot of knowledge on this subject. So this is the fourth part of the reconnaissance missions done by Mick Steele, Jack Wounds, Darren Nichols and anyone else a few weeks before and on the day before the triple murders. I'm using phone log evidence, witness statements and Darren Nichols' version of events according to his second statement, as he says he had no prior knowledge the murders were going to take place. In part 1, I discussed how they chose a murder location, a meeting place where they could start their journey that evening, and a plan to lure Tucker, Tate and Rolfe to their deaths. In part 2, I discussed how Mick Steele had to be a passenger in the Range Rover to lure the Essex boys to the chosen location so he could not be a shooter whilst guiding them to the track. I discussed how Darren Nichols had the chance to buy a firearm but changed his mind and devised a plan at the last moment to be just the getaway driver, which left Jack Wounds, who had access to 2 unlicensed shotguns. I also covered the possibility of them hiring a hitman from the Boers, who are a notorious Canning Town crime family. In part 3, I discussed how they did a recce a few weeks before the murders, going down the A12, then driving through Brentwood using the backcountry roads and finding a place where they could stop off and put fake plates over the original ones. They then found a place where Mick Steele could meet the Essex boys and the others could park up close by and wait for them to turn up in the Range Rover so they could set off to the pre-chosen murder location. They also found a place which had to be further away from the Rettendon Turnpike, being the Hungry Hippo in Rayleigh, and this was crucial on the evening as Mick Steele would get the Essex boys to follow him there, thus giving time for the others to get in place down the farm track. Mick Steele could then get into their vehicle so his Hilux would not be seen anywhere near the murder location. He also had to make sure he sat directly behind the driver, Craig Rolfe. He did this so he could get out into the open space to go and open the gate, and then the ambush could begin. In this video, I'm going to cover the actual recce they may have done the day before the actual murders. The final checks they would have done before they told the Essex boys that a meet was going to take place in the next day or so to show them where a light aircraft would be landing somewhere in the Essex area with a shipment of coke, and it would be Tucker, Tate and Rolfe's job to rob them once the light aircraft landed. But in fact it was a ploy to lure the Essex boys to their deaths. As we look at the phone log evidence, we can see the calls that were made on the morning of the 5th, the day before the murders, and as you can see near the top, Mick Steele phones Darren Nichols' landline at 7:06 AM. Was this the call to tell him that they were all going to do a final recce that day? According to Darren Nichols and his workmate and General Gopher, a Colin Bridge, he said they were working in Sunbury-on-Thames in London in early December of that year, but cannot remember the exact days. So if Darren Nichols was working that day, was Mick Steele trying to find out what time he would be back from London and in his hometown of Braintree, so they could organise a time to meet at Mark's Tea? Then from there, they could do their final checks. So I'm expecting a lot of phone calls between them through the early part of the day in these phone logs. Now in this 7:06 AM call, did Mick Steele tell Darren Nichols he'll be out soon? So if you need to contact him, you'll have to phone him on his mobile. At 9:21 AM, Darren Nichols phones Mick Steele's mobile. So from this information, we know Mick Steele is out and is on the move. At 10:01 AM, Mick Steele uses his mobile to phone his own landline. So from this information, we know he's definitely on the move at this specific time. Next, there is 3 phone calls from Mick Steele's landline to his mobile between 10:04 and 10:13 AM. So this also goes towards him not being at home and he's out and about. And what's he up to and where's he going on this specific day? The next call is at 11:34 AM to Darren Nichols' mobile. So both of them now are out and about and are staying in contact with each other but have not met up. 2 minutes later at 11:36 AM, Jack Williams uses his mobile to phone his own landline. So from this information, we know he's not at home. Is he on his way to the haulage yard to do some work? So far, from all the information we've seen, all 3 of them are out and about by this time. Now, just a little bit further down on these phone logs, at 12:15, Mick Steele uses his mobile to ring Darren Nichols' mobile. Is this the call to find out what time he'll be finishing work in London and he will be back in Braintree? During this telephone call, did Darren Nichols tell Mick Steele what time he'll be finished working in London and he literally will be back in Braintree? After Mick Steele gets his information, he can pick a time for them all to meet at Mark's Tea and begin their final recce. This is the last call between the two until later that evening. Now, Mick Steele hasn't been at home not long after the 9:21 AM call from Darren Nichols' mobile to Mick Steele's landline. So, where's he been? What has he been doing whilst he's been out and about? Has he met someone already? Maybe the hitman from the notorious Bowers crime family? I mean, if a hitman was paid to carry out these murders, he's not going to have any direct communication via mobiles. So did he insist Mick Steele drive to the Peacock Gym in London where the Bowers discuss all their criminal activity? I mean, did Mick Steele turn up at the Peacock Gym and meet the hitman and tell him they will be doing their final recce today and tell him what time and place to meet up on the day of the murders? Has the hitman already done his recce of the farm track and the Rettendon area? I will be covering that in part 5 of these recce videos, so keep a lookout for that. Now at 12:40 PM, he's still not at home as he gets a call from his landline. As you can see, at 12:57 PM, he rings his landline. At 1:16 PM, Darren Nichols is probably still in London working as he phones his own landline. Now, the first contact between Mick Steele and Jack Wilms takes place at 1:31 p.m, which is at the bottom of the screen. Is this the call where Mick Steele tells Jack Wilms what time to meet at their usual place, being Mark's Tea? The reason I say this is because this is the last call between the two until later on that evening. I mean, they wouldn't need to phone each other in the afternoon because they are going to be together. I mean, there's no phone logs between Darren Nicholls and Mick Steele through the afternoon also, so maybe all three of them have met up and are doing their final recce. So what we'll do now is look at the afternoon phone logs of the 5th and the day before the murders. And the next interesting call in these phone logs is the 2:04 p.m. call at the top of the page from G&T Haulage, which is Jack Wilms' workplace, to his home landline. So he's in the Barham area, which is not far from the Sorrel Horse pub where the calls take place the day after in the afternoon to the public payphone box at the end of Pat Tate's Road and to Tony Tucker's mobile. Coincidence? Surely not. Now, between 2:27 to 3:15 p.m, Darren Nicholls uses his mobile to phone his home landline. Was he trying to phone his wife to tell her he's going to be late home from work? Is this because he's meeting the others at Mark's Tea and will be doing the final recce the day before the murders? Now, in police custody, why wasn't Darren Nicholls questioned about these calls on the 5th? He was questioned about the day of the murder phone calls, which was the 6th, but not on these, on the 5th. Yet another reason I think he knew the murders were going to take place and played his part in it all, and he's done a deal off tape with the police to turn Supergrass, and in return he and his family will be allowed into the witness protection scheme. Did the police decide not to question him about these phone calls that were made between him and Mick Steele and Mick Steele and Jack Wilms' calls the day before the murders? I mean, it builds up a picture of what was going on the 5th, just like they build up a picture of what was going on the 6th, the day of the murders. Did the police know this could go against him if questioned in court by the defence? They could pick holes in his statement about this and prove he had prior knowledge the murders were going to take place, and the police couldn't risk that as the trial may collapse, so there would be no questioning Darren Nicholls about these phone logs on the 5th. I mean, to me, looking at these phone logs, it says they're all in contact between each other on this day, and Darren Nicholls is going to meet up with them later in the afternoon to do a final recce, as they don't contact each other after 1:31 p.m. I mean, Mick Steele has been out and about since 9:21 a.m. Jack Wilms' last call from his workplace is at 2:04 p.m. and Darren Nicholls has been out since 7:06 a.m. I mean, as I'm looking at these phone logs on the 5th, I mean the calls in the morning and the end in the early afternoon, then there's a long gap in the phone logs before they contact each other again. In fact, the next call made was from Jack Wilms' mobile to Mick Steele's landline at 6:07 p.m. So there's a large time frame for them to do a final recce before going ahead with the murders the day after. So for the next part of this video, I will go through their final recce, which is basically the same as I covered in part 3 of these recce videos. So I will just screenshot the places they checked for the last time. So sometime after 3:15 PM, when Darren Nichols phoned his home landline, they all met up at Mark's T, which is the red marker at the top, and from there they set off down the A12, which is the blue line, and turn off at Brentwood. Now these journeys would have been timed so they can carry out their plan. They may have checked the weather forecast to see what it was going to be like and added extra time due to it going to be wintry. So the first place they check when driving through Brentwood is the Thorndon Country Park here, making sure this lane is not blocked and they will be able to access it with no problems, like roadworks, etc. This is where Darren Nichols will be getting out of Mixteel's Hilux tomorrow, and he will be getting into the Volkswagen Passat that Jack Wilms will be driving. And they would then drive down to the bottom of this lane and get at the gates, where they will fix the false plates over the original ones. Then Darren Nichols will play his part and become a getaway driver. I mean, although he's not going to be a shooter, this is where his role starts as being involved in the triple murders under the joint enterprise law. Now, Mixteel would have driven ahead to the meeting point. I mean, he's clever. He's not going to get caught with these two if they get spotted sticking false plates over the original ones on the Passat. I mean, he's going to make sure his vehicle's not going to be seen in the Rettendon village on the night. So the next part of their final recce is to drive to the Halfway House pub, about a mile or so from the Thorndon Country Park. As I've explained before in a previous video, I think this car park was specifically chosen so Darren Nichols and Jack Wilms and anyone else involved could park up out of sight when the Range Rover turns up, as it's a big car park. Also, there's a front entrance which leads directly onto a slip road, so when the Range Rover does turn up, they can set off straight away to Rettendon. From the Halfway House pub car park, they drive on to the Hungry Hippo in Rayleigh to make sure everything's okay and nothing's going to slow them down like roadworks or diversions. All the journeys would have been timed bar this one, as when Mixteel meets the Essex boys at the Halfway House pub car park, then bringing them here gives time for the others to get in place down the track. I say the others as I think Darren Nichols was also supposed to be a shooter, but his bottle went and managed to get out of these slayings. I definitely would not rule out that a hitman was paid to commit these murders. I mean, he would have done his own recce of the area of Rettendon and most likely met up with Mixteel and the others on one of their recces, maybe this final recce, just to go over any last details before the murders. I will be covering if a hitman was used in these triple murders and if he did his own recce a few days before the murders in the next video. So subscribe to my channel so you don't miss that one. And talking of a hitman, I'm thinking of doing a video on if a contract killer was used by Mixteel, Jack Wilms and Darren Nichols to take out Tucker, Tate and Rolf that night. I might try and turn it into a 2 or 3 parter, who knows. But it won't be for a while yet, as I've got other videos to make at first, but I'm definitely thinking about it. Maybe give me your thoughts in the comments section. Right, so back to this video and the last location for Mixed Steel and the others to check for on their final recce. So the last place they will travel to is the chosen murder location, which is the farm track at White House Farm. And this is a very important check. Due to early recces a few weeks before the murders, they will be checking what time the track's last used by the farmer, which would have been around about 4:30 p.m. According to the farmer Peter Theobald, by the way. They would have pulled up close by and even walked down the track to check where the exact murders were going to take place, checking if the gate's locked or if it's not, making sure it can be shut prior to the Range Rover turning up. Just a final thought before I finish this video. As I've done the research for these recce videos, it does seem to me a lot of planning went into these murders. Definitely a week or so, and I really think a recce was done on the final day before the murders. I mean, having looked at the phone logs from the 5th, there is a big gap in the early afternoon to late afternoon where there's no phone calls between the three. So it is possible within this time frame that they had met up and had done a final recce. It is possible that they did do one. Right, that's it for this particular video today, and the next part of these recce videos I will be looking into a hitman hired by Mixed Steel and the others to see if he did his own recce a day or so before the murders, and then we'll carry on with the late afternoon with this final recce that could have been done the day before the murders. So first of all, I'd just like to thank the YouTube subscribers. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget you get to see these first, as I don't upload them onto the Facebook group for at least a week. Talking of the Facebook group, don't forget you can join if you're interested. It's called the Real Essex Boys Murder Club. We have over 30,000 members now, I think it is, the last time I checked. We have new posts going on a daily basis. All we ask is respect other people's opinions on there, as we all have our own theories on what we think happened that night. And last of all, I'd like to thank the admins who do a fantastic job of keeping the group ticking over. So until next time, take care.